of the KKK.
Hey y'all, Jamie here, back with another episode of Milk, Honey, and Mayhem. Today's video might make you uncomfortable. That's okay. It should. Today we're talking about the biggest skeleton in the closet of Pulaski, the KKK. And I wanted to talk about it now during Black History Month, because while this is not the story of the Black community, it continues to impact them to this day. So I tell it in honor of my heavily melanated brothers and sisters. We can't change the past. We can damn sure learn from it. So let's get into it. In my first video, I touched on the importance of the U.S. colored troops here during the Civil War. After the war, that importance continued in the way that many of these men and their families became successful business owners in town. Half the townsfolk supported the northern states in their inclusion of all races, and the other half were all in on their perceived superiority. It's my opinion that jealousy is the root of racism, and these men and women were living, in some cases, better lives than the white folks around them. And it's this environment that, in my opinion, brought about the rise of the Klan. But when it comes to the origins of the Klan, we're lucky enough to have a personal account by one of the founding members, James Crow, in the form of a letter to the editor of the Nashville American in 1905. This story begins on Christmas Eve of 1865 when 6 war buddies met up for a night of drinking at the law office of Judge Thomas Jones on Madison Street in Pulaski. Bored and angry that the country was taking a more progressive shift, one of the men said,
Boys, it sure is boring since Jim, Bob, and Leroy ran off to join the Masons. What we need to do is start us up our own club. But the Masons are out there doing good shit for the community, Frank. What are we gonna do?
I'll tell you what we're gonna do. We're gonna dress up like the ghost of them dead Confederate soldiers, and we're gonna prank the darkies. What should have been forgotten with the morning's hangover was not. These fools decided to actually do it. Who were these men anyway? James Crow fought in several Civil War battles, including Shiloh. Captured alongside Sam Davis, he snitched and lived while Sam Davis was hung as a message. He later became an official in the Presbyterian Church. John C. Lester was a lawyer, an official in the Methodist Church, and later became a member of the Tennessee legislature. John Kennedy was a soldier and a devout Presbyterian. Calvin Jones, a lawyer, the son of the judge, and a proud member of the Episcopal Church. Richard Reed, a lawyer who attended church with Crow and Kennedy, and Frank McCord, a member of the Methodist Church and the editor of the local newspaper, the Pulaski Citizen. That fateful night in Calvin's daddy's law office saw the rise of what was originally called the Merry Six. Now, the Freemasons were known to do good things in the community and help its citizens any way it could. But these boys and their secret club was focused solely on their own amusement and was more of a reason to get together and drink than anything else. Deciding that the Merry Six moniker didn't exactly fit, they tossed around a few ideas and settled on Kúklos, the Greek word for circle, and deemed themselves the Kúklos Klan. But with our southern drawl, it sounded more like Ku Klux Klan, and that's what stuck. Now, it's never been a secret that the Masons had elaborate costumes and strange rituals, so the boys had a few more drinks and came up with their own. The image of the hooded white robes didn't come about until later. Those original outfits were gaudy, multicolored, floor-length robes and tall hats with slits cut in the eyes. With that sorted, they needed a more mysterious place to meet. A tornado had come through the area a while before and leveled a few of the houses. One of them still had the basement completely intact, and that seemed like the perfect level of spooky and seclusion that they'd been looking for. With the first Grand Lodge acquired, now these fellas decided they needed some official titles. James Crow deemed himself the Grand Turk, or Master of Ceremonies. He then appointed Frank McCord as the Grand Cyclops and John Kennedy as the Grand Magi, President and Vice President, respectively. John Lester and Calvin Jones were Nighthawks, or messengers, and Richard Reed held the position of lictor, or the guardian of the den. As they rode their horses through town on the way to and from their meetings, they really leaned into the dead Confederate prank and scared a good quarter of the town shitless. Within a few weeks, the good old boys were lining up to join in the mayhem. What had begun as an underground revolt against Republican leaders and a hope to restore things to the way they were before black men began owning competing businesses had begun to take a darker turn, and the men wrote out an official charter to get everyone in line.
The 1867 Charter of the Ku Klux Klan states, "This is an institution of chivalry, humanity, mercy, and patriotism, embodying in its genius and in its principles all that is chivalric in conduct, noble in sentiment, generous in manhood, and patriotic in purpose, its peculiar objects being, first, to protect the weak, the innocent, and the defenseless from the indignities, wrongs, and outrages of the lawless, the violent, and the brutal, to relieve the injured and oppressed, to succor the suffering and the unfortunate, and especially the widows and orphans of Confederate soldiers."
With chapters spreading from Virginia to Texas, they considered themselves the invisible empire of the South and named Confederate leader Nathan B. Forrest the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. Turning to a sort of vigilante justice,
James Crow said in that 1905 letter, "So long as the original genuine KKK existed, I never knew an act committed by them that I'm now ashamed to own."
but on January 7th of 1868, a couple of the boys took things way too far. Calvin Carter, a black man, and Calvin Lamberth, a white man, had been involved in a squabble the summer before over some business transactions. But the truth of the matter is, the Pulaski race riots started over a damn woman. Don't they always?
Lucy Reynolds, a black woman, was dating Calvin Lamberth's white ass. Now, I don't know if Calvin Carter had a crush on Lucy or was just dealing with his own racism, but when he found out, he told Lucy if she kept on seeing him, he'd slave whip her. Lucy told her man, and he decided right then that he was going to kill Calvin Carter, and he stood on the porch of the Carter family grocery with a big stick in hand and waited for them to open. Calvin wasn't there that morning, so he returned around lunch with three other white men. This time they were all armed with pistols. Before they could cause any commotion, the constables showed up and made them all leave. The third time he came alone, determined and armed. A neighbor saw him raise his pistol and called out to Calvin Carter to warn him of what was coming, and the two men began firing on each other. Hearing all this commotion, 18 white fellows rushed out of their houses and into the street, all armed with rifles and shotguns, and surrounded the store with Calvin Carter and 6 other innocent black men inside. The chief of police told him to hunker down and he'd handle it, but before he could even try to talk to sense into them, those white fellas busted through the doors and fired on all of those innocent men. Every single one of those white men were arrested and found to be Klan members, founding member John Kennedy being one of them. Interestingly enough, Calvin Lamberth, the one shagging Miss Lucy Reynolds, was also found to be a Klansman. Make that make sense. Tennessee Governor Brownlow and the Pulaski Mayor John Ezell did their best to shut it all down, but that was to no avail. When Grant won the presidency that November, he ordered the head racist himself, Nathan Bedford Forrest, to call for them to disband. The group still existed, but they mostly kept quiet until the 1915 release of Birth of a Nation, a film by D.W. Griffith which romanticized the Klan and led to its second iteration. The Klan was back, and boy were they proud of it. So proud that in 1917, a brass plaque was placed outside the law office where that very first boys' night took place. The Klan were now emboldened to show their racism, but were still very much a vigilante justice organization.
Now, as much disgust as I have for the Klan, the hard to swallow truth for me is that I likely wouldn't exist had my grandfather, Nick Burns, not been a Klansman. See, John Witt was a white man, but he was an abusive drunk and just a real son of a bitch. His wife was giving birth to their 7th child at home, and the baby was breech. Rather than call for the doctor, he let her and the baby die right there in that bed. The Klan got word of it, and the very next night, they showed up to hang him from the tree in his front yard. As they were slipping the noose over his neck, a little 8-year-old girl came running from the house and begged them to let her daddy live, explaining that there'd be no way she could keep all those siblings together and raise them without him. So they spared his life, and Nick Burns kept watch on the family from afar. Over time, the siblings all moved off to join the military or get married, and when that little 8-year-old girl was about 17, my grandfather went up to the house, reintroduced himself, and asked for her hand in marriage. They went on to spend the rest of their lives together, and they created 2 of the most amazing little girls, the youngest of which was my mom.
Klan activity slacked off a bit between the 30s and the 50s, but when the civil rights movement began to make waves in the late 50s, the Klan reemerged, ready to unleash their hatred onto the world.
1960 saw the desegregation of schools in Giles County, and my mom was 12 when a little girl wearing a purple dress with her hair in braids walked in and sat down next to her. Zeta Jane looked down at her own purple dress and her own braids and decided right then they should be friends. And they were. While I'll never know how my grandfather the Klansman felt about that, I do know that my mom said that he welcomed them into their home and he never treated her any less than his own girls. Now, while my mama was out here learning to properly season her food, my dad got his own piece of life-changing advice.
One hot summer day, he was with his father on his way to do some business at the courthouse when my pops got thirsty. Old Morse pointed at the fountain on the outside of the courthouse and told him to get a drink. My dad, confused, looked at the colored-only sign and back up to his dad, who doubled down and said, "Boy, it's the same water. If you're thirsty, get a drink." And that was pretty much the attitude of most everyone in town in those days. The clans still existed here, of course, and they caused plenty of heartache. But for the most part, they kept to themselves out in Rose Hill, sig-heiling their burning crosses.
We all knew who they were, though, even the ones holding public office. And it sickens me to know that there are still people holding public office that have those same morals and values today. Marsha Blackburn on a beat, yo. We see you, sis.
I can't mention public office without mentioning this guy, James Monroe Brown. A business owner and just a stand-up fella, he worked with Martin Luther King Jr. and the Reverend Jesse Jackson during the height of the Civil Rights Movement. Upon returning home, wouldn't you know, he was told to his face that he was not allowed to drink from the water fountain and was pointed to that godforsaken whites only sign. I would have caused a scene, but this man played the long game and ran for commissioner, becoming the first black elected official in Pulaski in 1972. President Carter even invited him to the White House in 78 to discuss ways to bridge the racial divide. In the mid-80s, David Duke, the imperial wizard at the time, set his sights on Pulaski, and every year Klan members from all over descended on our square with their white hoods, spewing hatred everywhere and calling it their homecoming, pushing the boundaries further and further every year.
In 1986, it was January 18th. In 1987, it was January 17th. In 1988, it was the 16th. And in 1989, the 14th. You see where we're going here.
Late in 1989, Thomas Robb took over as the national director of the Klan. Full of piss, vinegar, and audacity, he requested a permit to assemble on January 13th of 1990. Y'all, we don't play about our Martin Luther King Jr. down here. That parade had been scheduled. Not liking that, he demanded to use the local high school and fill those halls with their hatred. Absolutely not. Old Tom didn't realize who was going to be standing in his way. Dan Spear, may he rest in peace, was an alderman while all of these assemblies were going on. But that year, he was elected as the town mayor, and he was not here for the bullshit. Mr. Spear led the movement that brought cooperation across racial, social, and economic lines and brought about a united front against the Klan. All the local businesses got together and agreed to shut all the way down that day. No stores, hotels, restaurants, or gas stations. My dad had a body shop at that time, and even he shut down. Mayor Dan Spear took the sign that had been placed right here in 1917, flipped it around, and bolted it on backwards. Pulaski had made its stand, and we were turning our back on hatred.
The Klan still showed up that day, but they could no longer give their hearts to their beloved sign. They couldn't find anywhere to eat, go to the restroom, get gas, spend the night, or even get their cars repaired. And what a shame it was that so many of them drove over sharp road trash that year and had to ride home on their rims. Allegedly, of course. Thomas Robb passed away in 2023. Concepts of condolences. Last year, I attended an event where the amazing Justin Jones of the Tennessee Three looked around the room at the mixture of races, ages, and socioeconomic classes and said, "This is what democracy looks like." That makes me incredibly proud. And now that you know how the Klan came to be and how the town felt about that, let me be very clear on where Pulaski, Tennessee still stands today. Until next time, y'all be good.
He's gonna rise. Yeah, he's gonna rise. And all you lynchers are gonna be damned. And out of that mud walks a brand new man. Woo-hoo.